Hey guys, today we continue with the review of my BMW S1000XR first gen with more than 100,000 kilometers on the clock. If you find this review interesting and useful, please confirm it by subscribing to my channel. You can do it by clicking on 1-2 rider icon in the lower left corner of the screen. I would appreciate it a lot. Also, should you have any suggestions or questions, please write it in the comments below. Alright, now we begin with the real deal, the XR's engine. This engine is well known since it exists from 2009 when it was first installed on the S1000RR motorcycle. Of course, the XR's engine has some differences compared to that on the S1000RR. Its power was reduced from 199 to 160 horsepower, but with improved torque on low RPM. Maximum torque of the XR is 114 Nm at 9,250 RPM, which is more elastic and usable in the road conditions than the RR's 113 Nm at 10,500 RPM. Consequently, the XR is easily driven at low RPM at low speeds, for example in city conditions, as some kind of a maxi scooter. Also, its throttle, which is fully driven by wire, is very smooth and doesn't make that jerky feeling at low speeds as most bikes do. This is very convenient when you want to keep constant low speed. And when one wants to switch to a sporty ride, it is enough just to open the throttle, regardless of the gear the bike is in, and the XR will instantly release its sporty spirit. Its torque is especially impressive in higher gears, hence one can ride it in 6th gear almost all the time. This is very convenient if a rider enters a corner unprepared, at low speed but in higher gear, and the bike will properly respond and save them from a potentially dangerous situation. Concerning the power of the engine, the XR is definitely ruler of this category of motorcycle. As soon as the RPM increases, you realize the magic character of this inline 4, which constantly pulls until the red RPM zone is reached. At 9,000 RPM, the bike becomes totally mad, but thanks to the great DTC, you never lose control of the bike. Such a power and torque provide this bike to accelerate to 100 km per hour in just 3 seconds, while it reaches 200 in only 8.5 seconds, which is great for the most of sport bikes. The engine itself, if maintained properly, as is case here, worked flawlessly all 100k kilometers. It always ignites as it should, works nice with that sporty hopping of RPM at idle, just to remind everyone of its sporty soul. Now we come to a very important part of this review, the engine noise. Before I got the XR, I read a lot of knocking noise from the engine that sometimes resulted with completely worn out camshaft. Hence, after I turned this bike on for the first time, I got worried because of the hard rattling noise from the engine. Actually, this engine rattled so hard that a friend of mine mocked me with the claim that there is a huge nest of rattlesnake within this engine. And in addition to that, the experienced motorcycle mechanic I know told me when heard the XR sound at idle that its valves and camshafts won't survive another 500 kilometers. Indeed, compared to the Japanese bikes I owned earlier, the XR is a real rattlesnake. There is always a loud chain noise from the right side of the engine and some weird knocking sound when listened from above the engine. the mechanic was so wrong. The knocking engine sound that worried me showed up as a completely normal thing on this bike. Hence the final verdict is that this bike's engine is just noisy and one should not make any drama about it. I've checked the camshafts and valves 3 times so far at 40k, 70k and 97k kilometers, and each time they looked as new. What is even more impressive is the fact that on the last service I measured 100% correct valve clearance. All the intake and exhaust valves were in ideal position, and you have to admit that this is not the case with most motorcycles, even cars. Of course, the problem of worn camshafts is still the case with some XR engines, regardless of the production year. And the BMW's explanation is that they had a bad batch of camshafts delivered. The good thing is that they usually die within the first 20k kilometers, while the bike is still under the factory warranty and the repair is fully covered by the BMW. Other cases of worn camshafts, when the bike is properly maintained, are really rare. And the best way for the worried owners to find out if their XR has real camshaft problem is to listen the engine noise while slowly increasing the RPM. If the ticking, knocking sound does not increase within the high RPM range, you are good to go. However, if the knocking gets louder after 5000 RPM, that could be the sign that your camshafts are not okay, and you should check it either by yourself, by removing the cylinder head cover and observing the camshafts, or by the professional service. I will discuss it in detail in the maintenance part of this review, and if needed, I could create a tutorial for you how to check it. Another interesting problem is the cam chain noise and rattling, which can be dreadful when ignited after a few hours of standing still. This rattling sounds like the whole engine is going to fall apart, and it lasts about a second when it finally disappears. The reason for this is that the cam chain tensioner needs a second to be completely pressurized by oil, but it only happens after around 30k kilometers under the regular cam chain wear. If not replaced by the so-called silver cap hydraulic tensioner, which is a bit longer than the OEM one, or by the manual tensioner, which I prefer, this rattling noise will be heard even on idle. So, as soon as you hear this rattling sound for the first time, it is time to replace it. This rattling sound comes from cam chain hitting the aluminum under the right cam chain slider, and in time it could develop a severe damage to the whole engine. That's why I replaced the hydraulic with the manual tensioner at 36k kilometers, which I bought for 50 euros, and never have I had any problems with it hitherto. My bike has more than 104k kilometers on the clock, and it doesn't show any signs of wear. At the last 97k service, I checked the cam chain wear and the markers were just fine. It's around 1/3 of a camshaft tooth out of spec, which is more than acceptable. Hence, I won't replace it at least for another 20k kilometers. Also, the manual tensioner doesn't require often adjustments, approximately at every 10,000 kilometers. Very simple to do and takes less than a minute. As for the sound of the XR's exhaust, it's just wonderful. Typical 1000cc inline four with pretty open can that the greatest German composers wouldn't be ashamed of. Really, you don't need anything more than the stock exhaust to enjoy its roaring. You can hear it at any speeds, but at the same time, it is never disturbing, which cannot be said when the exhaust can is removed. With such a full system upgrade, the XR exhaust sound becomes so loud, often unbearable on touring rides. But for the cafe racers, it is more than welcomed. Regarding the gearbox, the XR is among the best motorcycles. Gear shifts are always precise, and the gearbox gets better and better with time. I swear, it now shifts better than ever. But the best part here is the quick shifter. BMW marked it as Gear Shift Assist Pro. It's just perfect. Worked flawlessly all the time. Basically, I use the clutch only for starts and stops, all the 70k kilometers I've made with this bike so far. And once the engine reaches 3000 RPM, gear shifts with the quick shifter become effortless, both upshifts and downshifts. The auto blipping and downshifts are so intuitive that it works much better than the rider can do it with the clutch. As I've said earlier, this is very convenient for the two-up riding because it prevents the passenger from hitting the rider in the back in hard acceleration gear shifts. I've ridden BMW Boxers 1200 and 1250s, but their quick shifters do not work as well as the XRs. On the other side, the XR clutch is pretty heavy, hence lucky us for having a great gear shift assistant. The state of clutch basket and plates at 100k kilometers is also great, without any warped steel plates and worn friction plates. All good. All in all, my S1000XR engine showed up as a very reliable. Of course, I maintained it properly, changed the engine oil at every 5 to 6,000 kilometers max. Although the service manual suggests to do it at 10k kilometers, I thought it would be much better for the engine's health to change it more often. Now, about the engine brakes and failures. Total amount of these is only one. My generator stator died at 76,000 kilometers. When I removed the generator cover, it was totally burned. But this failure is more or less expected on all bikes within the first 100k kilometers, and the replacement is a piece of cake. Actually, the hardest part of this job is to get the generator cable over the engine frame to the regulator behind the rear shock, and you have to be careful with the clutch cable when disengaging it from the generator cover. Besides this engine issue, on one occasion at around 50k kilometers, my XR didn't want to start for a few minutes. It happened on a very hot summer day when I parked it in a cold garage with the engine temperature of 100 plus degrees. As I read it later, it has something to do with the fuel temperature pressure sensor, where the ECU prevents the fuel injectors to engage. The only thing that a rider can do here is to leave the bike for some time. In my case, it started normally after 5 minutes, and it has never happened since. Okay friends, thank you for subscribing to my channel. I hope you are satisfied with the review. Should you have any suggestions for the upcoming videos, please write it in the comments below. And the next part of this review, covering the XR's brakes, suspension and bodywork, is on the way. Thank you for watching and see you soon.